The River Irwell cuts through the heart of Salford. Its dark waters flow beneath bridges and past warehouses, a reminder of a time when this place was the beating heart of the Industrial Revolution. But for one brief remarkable winter in 1887, these muddy banks hosted a very different kind of gathering, a spectacle that brought the echoes of the American plains to the smoke-filled streets of Victorian England. It began in the autumn of 1887, when a small fleet of boats churned up the foggy waters of the River Irwell, bringing with them strange and wondrous cargo. On board, the faces weathered by years of battle and hard living, were nearly 100 Sioux warriors, veterans of the Great Sioux War, that fought for their land and their people against the unstoppable tide of American expansion, only to find themselves now performing for the curious eye of the English crowds. The Sioux came to Salford as part of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, a travelling spectacle that sought to capture the mythic spirit of the American frontier for European audiences. It was a strange blend of theatre, rodeo, and living history, where legendary figures, sharpshooters and cowboys, performed feats of skill and daring. For the Sioux warriors, the show was both a stage and prison, a place where their warrior traditions were turned into entertainment for the strangers who knew little about their struggles. To the Sioux, the damp, smoke-filled air of Salford must have felt like a breath from some iron beast, and the riverbanks lined with grim brick-faced factories. The air was thick, the smell of coal and steam, and a far cry from the endless wind-swept plains at the once called home. Their encampment, a cluster of teepees and fire pits, must have seemed like a fragile outpost of a dying world, standing defiantly against the encroaching chaos of the industrial age. Amongst those warriors was a towering figure, a 6'8" giant known as surrounded by the enemy. His very name, a powerful metaphor, spoke to the ceaseless struggle of his people. A warrior forever, encircled by adversary. At just 22 years old, surrounded by the enemy was a legend amongst his people. His massive frame and fierce spirit making him a formidable presence both on the battlefield and in the show arena. Imagine the sight of this warrior, feathered headdress, swaying in the cold Salford wind, each bead and feather a symbol of the battles he's won and lost, his long black braids, soaked in the endless drizzle, a face that has seen the buffaloes vanish from the plains, and the sacred Black Hills, scarred by gold hunters, and his people forced into reservations. His deep-set eyes, sharp and defiant, stared into the smoky distance, where the clanging factory bells and the shouts of dock workers filled the air. A far cry from the cities of eagles and the howl of the wolves. For the Victorian crowds, he must have seemed like a living relic, a ghost warrior from a distant, untamed land that would have watched in awe as he performed his war dances. His massive frame moving with grace, his shadow stretching across the mud street ground like a spectre of forgotten age. To them he was a creature, a myth, brought back to life, a reminder of the time when the West was still wild and the Sioux were the undisputed lords of the plains. Yet behind the awe and spectacle was a deeper, more haunting reality. Surrounded by the enemy, carried the weight of his people's trauma. The massacre at Wounded Knee. The sting of the treaty is broken, and the heartbreak of a world stolen. The broken promises, and the loss of a way of life. Surrounded by the enemy was not just a performer. He was the living embodiment of a wounded nation. He carried the weight of his people's pain, the echoes of the massacres. He danced not just for himself, but for those who could no longer dance. For the elders left behind on the reservations. For the children who would never know buffalo's migration. For the warriors who had fallen in battle. And the women who had sung for them under the prairie skies. Every movement was a message. Every breath he drew from Salford's choking air was an act of remembrance. It was survival through a ceremony. A dance performed on muddy British soil, but rooted deeply in the souls of the plains. To the Sioux, every step he took was a reminder of the ever-tightening circle around the culture. His dance is not just for the entertainment of strangers, but to keep alive the spirit of the people fighting against erasure. Another towering figure amongst the Sioux was Black Elk. He wasn't just a warrior, but a spiritual leader, a keeper of visions, and a seer of his people's fate. His journey in Salford took a darker turn when he became separated from his companions. He was lost amongst the soot-covered brick walls and shadowy alleys of industrial Manchester. The gaslit streets, with the twisting unfamiliar paths, must have seemed like a labyrinth. The air thick, with the sharp scent of coal and smoke, so unlike the crisp pine-scented air of the Black Hills. We couldn't talk the Wasichu language, Black Elk later wrote in his memoirs. We did not know what to do, so we just roamed around. For a man whose life had been spent in the open air, beneath the skies that stretched the horizon, the oppressive smoke-choked streets of Manchester must have felt like a cage. Each flicker of the gaslight casting shadows that danced like the ghostly memories of lost warriors. For days, Black Elk and his companions wandered the city, the leather-soled moccasins slipping on the rain-slicked cobbled stones, the sacred songs swallowed by the grinding gears of the industry. Eventually, Black Elk found his way to London and then Paris, performing wherever he could to find an audience, always moving and always searching for a way home. The scars of the lonely winter in Salford, the isolation and the alienation of being a stranger in a strange land would have stayed with him for the rest of his life. For surrounded by the enemy, the journey ended in tragedy. He fell ill, his massive frame brought low by a lung infection that cut his life short at just 22 years old. He died in his teepee on the banks of the Irwell, the steady, polluted flow of the river, a far cry from the clean rushing waters of the plains that he once called home. But what happened next remains a mystery. Some say he was taken to Hope Hospital, where his body vanished, perhaps stolen or forgotten. Some say he was buried on the banks of the River Irwell, a ceremonial burial. But his final resting place is lost to history. But here's where the story takes a jaw-dropping turn, and one that the history books don't tell you. one that might just change the way you see Salford forever. When the Sioux warriors came to England in 1887, they were seen as performers, legends, even ghosts from a fading frontier. But behind the war paint and the ceremonial dances, many of them carried a darker truth. They couldn't go home. Back in America, some of these men were wanted by the US military, veterans of battles like Little Bighorn, branded not as heroes, but as fugitives. And if they've returned, they could risk it all. Trial, imprisonment, or even execution. So what did they do? They disappeared. Not into the wilderness, but into Salford. They stayed behind, slipping through the cobbled streets and chimney stacks of industrial England. And here's the unbelievable part. The people of Salford helped them. Locals gave them shelter, shared meals, friendship and love. They married into working class families and took British surnames. And slowly and quietly began new lives. They swapped the wide open plains for the soot-covered rooftops of Manchester, and they stayed. The bloodlines never left. Today, right now, in the 21st century, there are descendants of the Salford Sioux living amongst us. Ordinary people with extraordinary roots, whose ancestors rode with Buffalo Bill, who once danced by the firelight beside the River Irwell. And the most incredible part is they might not even know. The story of the Salford Sioux didn't end with the final whistle of the Wild West show. It lives on, in family trees, in forgotten photo albums, and in stories passed down over the kitchen table. It's in the DNA of the city. And maybe, just maybe, you could be a living relative of the Salford Sioux.
So, what an absolutely mind-blowing story. I've got nothing but admiration for the Sioux and what they, the struggles and hardship that they went through in their own country. And I admire the strength and resilience that they carried throughout their lives to sort of keep their heritage alive and their identity. It's just an incredible story. But if we recap on the whole thing and look back, and they must have been out of their minds when they came to somewhere like Salford. The plains of America, the open land, the open space, the cattle, the wildlife, the culture would have been an absolute massive shock to the system for them. They were basically surrounded by iron and brick and soot and coal and dock workers and poverty. And for them to settle in an area like that, it just must have been, it must have been just totally out of this world. But like I say, I've got nothing but admiration. Even when they came over here, every dance move, every living breath that they drawn was because of their heritage and culture and trying to keep it alive. And I just think it's great that when they were due to go back home, they would have faced prosecution. But I find it great that the people from Salford embraced them and took them under their wing. And I think that is probably the best trait that people from Salford, any Salfordian that's a true person of Salford, they have big hearts. They might not have much, and we might not have much, but they've got big hearts. And it was great to see. Maybe we get it from back then, like 140, possibly even longer. It's nice to see that the empathy and show, if someone's down on the luck, everyone gets together, especially the old school generation. They get together and they help people out when they need it the most, regardless of who you are, what background you've come from. And, you know, goes to show that generations later there is people, descendants from the Sioux, that still live in obviously in Salford and in Manchester, that people are trying to retrace their family tree. And it's crazy to think that the descendants, I bet there's a lot of people that don't know the descendants of the Sioux. But it's just an absolutely, it's a mind-boggling story, and it does pull on the heartstrings. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I've wanted to film it for a while. I must get, I reckon a month, I'll probably get 4 or 5 people asking me for the Sioux, and I've just never got round to doing it. So I'm so glad that I've actually put something together that you hopefully will enjoy. So I just want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for watching the video. If you are new and this is the first time you've watched it, I'd really appreciate it if you head over to the channel and subscribe. It doesn't cost a penny, but it just helps keep stories, these are important stories, helps keep important stories like this alive and fresh in the memory for people. So thanks once again. Have a look at your family tree, because you never know, you could be a descendant of the Sioux. How cool would that be? So until next time everyone, thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you all soon. Cheers.